I feel lucky that I get to introduce Bill Best today. I actually met Bill 7 years ago when I was working at the Berea College bookstore, and have done many book signings with him and love what he does for Appalachia and with the seed saving. Bill Best, farmer, writer, and professor emeritus from Berea College. Bill Best is the director of the Sustainable Mountain Agriculture Center and well known as an expert on preserving heirloom vegetables and plants. His newest book, Kentucky Heirloom Seeds, Growing, Eating, and Saving, is just published this month. So here's Bill.
I think people will get in.
Good morning, I think some people are trying to get in. That door must fit.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
The kangaroo jumped in.
A big dog.
It's true.
And this is what the book looks like. That's what it is.
Should have brought 3 tickets.
I'm going to have to apologize for my reading because these are dollar glasses from the store just this side of Walmart, because I just recently had a new lens put in my left eye, and I haven't been able to get my new reading glasses yet, so I'll do the best I can. I think I can get through without any problem. But those of you who know me already know that I've been doing this for soon to be 79 years, I guess. I started this when I was about 2.5. In the bean patch cornfield with my mother, who was pointing out I was picking the ones hanging low on the corn stalks, and she was picking the ones higher up. And she was also teaching me how to avoid the paxidal stinging worms and the black-colored stinging worms. Also, the paxidals were a deep green. But I was trying my best. All it took was 2 or 3 times with those stinging worms on your bare skin, and you learn to watch out for what Mother was talking about. Anyhow, I've been at this quite some time, back during the time when it was something that only eccentrics did, until recently it has moved a little bit into the mainstream, apparently. My family, extended family, nuclear family, extended family, we've all been at this for generations, and I'm continuing it with my own 4 generations now. I have great-grandchildren who are photographed in the book. One of my great-granddaughters, who was at the house just the other day, was asking when I would have beans ready for her to string again. And she's part Indian on her father's mother's side from Madison County, Kentucky. They were Cherokee on both sides of the family. And what I've observed during the last 50-plus years is that the most noted and outstanding seed savers were, you could almost always see some Indian in their backgrounds somewhere. And so I'm glad that it's continuing in my genealogy down there too. There is none in my own DNA, I don't think. I don't know, you never know. But anyhow, the Indians were doing this 1,000 years ago, at least in Kentucky. The foreword to this book is written by Dr. Gwen Henderson, who is a state archaeologist in Kentucky now. And I observed her, I listened to her talk in 2005 to the Kentucky Vegetable Growers Association meeting. And I recognized the beans that she put up on the in a photograph as being the same 4 types that were still growing. And there's some of these beans right here along with the modern beans. And the 4 types of beans that were being grown in Kentucky 1,000 years ago were the regular cornfield beans that have something like a seed shaped with a little bit of an indentation like a boat. Then there are the cut shorts where the beans are so packed tightly into the hull that they square off on the ends. They're cut short, in other words. Then there are the fall beans, the beans that were planted later in the season, that what everyone ate before pinto beans became so cheap. Of course, pintos are not grown in the mountains. They're a more dryland bean, and they're also picked by machine. And when we first started eating pinto beans when I was a kid, you had to mash them to avoid eating rocks. After I had nearly broken a tooth 2 or 3 times on rocks, I decided I learned to mash them because the machines that they harvested them with were pick up small stones, and they were hard to tell from what the beans were. And people learned to spread them, and this is still true to this day among one of my cousins that I'm going to quote from in just a minute. She pours her pintos out on a glass table, and the sound of the stone is a little bit different from the sound of the beans, and so she's able to pick the stones out. And anyhow, the bottom ones here are greasy grits. Now, we don't know if they, 1,000 years ago, if the hull was greasy or not, but they're the same type of small beans. So there were 4 basic types being grown 1,000 years ago, and we're still growing them now. And they're increasing in popularity to some degree because these beans actually have protein. As you all probably realize by now, the modern bean is protein free because you can't allow the seed to appear, or it's too tough to eat. So you have to pick it before the seed appears. And that was to accommodate the machines. Everything, almost everything in food nowadays is designed to accommodate machinery or multinational corporations. And I am one of Monsanto's biggest enemies, and they're one of my biggest enemies. Okay, I'm going to read some things that I wrote that I marked up for you. This came from a cousin, and this shows how far back. Let me show you one more photograph while I'm. One of my former students in Berea's Upward Bound program in 1967, and his wife. He was Blackfoot and Cherokee. She was Cherokee, and an amazing number of people in the mountains have Cherokee blood. Some Blackfoot, probably other tribes as well, but the Cherokee tended to be the dominant tribe. Okay, this is from a cousin who is married to another cousin on the other side. Clarine green vest. And she sent me some seeds. I've got over 700 heirloom bean varieties, probably 1,000 tomato varieties, a few candy roaster varieties, but I'll just read to you what Clarine said along with the beans. These are the beans that we found in Ben's mother's can house in an open half-gallon jar after she had been gone for 15 or 20 years. We planted them and they came up. She had told us that Ben and her family since she was a small child, and that she used to carry them in a little apron and drop seeds for her mother, who would plant them in the cornfield. In the fall they would pick bushels of these to pickle and to dry. When dry they thrashed them out on a large tarp and used as dry beans. It would have taken a lot to make a mess since the Hills had 12 children. Ben's mother, Cecil, would sit on her porch and fix these. She would shell out the ones that had gone to seed. She always threw away the black ones. Ronnie Hawkins remembered that she used to let them have the black ones to play with. They would take bean hulls and make fences and pretend the shell beans were cows. Of course, she had to let them have a few of the other colors too, so they would have different colors of cows. Now, this, I'm going into my own talking here now. The first eight Hill children were all girls. The youngest 4 were all boys. Girls learned early on how to plow and do all the other farm work. One girl would guide the horse along the road to be plowed, while the other would handle the plow. They were an amazing family, and many of their descendants still live in Upper Crabtree, my home community in western North Carolina. So that gives you some idea of how people started and how they even used their gardening to imagine things and play. Now let me go a little bit earlier. If anybody wants to ask a question at any time, please just...
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
How does one properly store heirloom seeds? How do you properly store them?
Well, beans, you have to pretty well freeze them. Originally, you could put them in a twist of tobacco, and tobacco is poisonous enough to kill the bean weevils. Then later on, some people would use very hot peppers. Then still later, when mothballs became available, they would use mothballs. And at the time freezers became available, almost universally, anybody who had a freezer started freezing them.
So
That's for beans.
You take your seeds, your beans, your seeds, put them in a baggie and then put them in the freezer?
Right.
And how many years can they survive in that environment?
Well, I've had 100% germination after 35 years in my mother's freezer.
Wow.
So I don't know, I would say indefinitely. Perhaps
Do you
2,000
shell them
years.
first, or do
Pardon?
do you shell them first, or do you leave?
You have to shell them first and let them dry out. You know. Now I've got on my table in there, I've got some shucky beans, which is the oldest way of preserving beans. I brought those just to illustrate to people what they look like. But they're called shucky beans or shuck beans in most of Kentucky. Parts of Kentucky and adjoining states in Tennessee, they're called fodder beans. In West Virginia and North Carolina, they're called leather breeches. And that's what I grew up with, is leather breeches. Okay, I'm just going to describe here the type of people that I've been dealing with all my life. Some old-time traditional seed savers. Some old-time seed savers can't read or write, but they're intellectually sharp and know the value of traditional forms of knowledge. One of them was my next-door neighbor for many years, who taught me a lot about saving and growing heirloom vegetables. These old-timers know that seed companies have been putting out inferior products, although they might not be able to figure out why. Many are high school dropouts who have gardened all their lives and remember the hard times of the Great Depression. I asked one of my neighbors who couldn't read and write, that he lived on our place for many years, and I took care of him right on up until he died, because his family had moved out west. But I once asked him, I said, Phil, how did you manage during the Depression? And he said, well, when was it? And I told him when it was. And he said, well, I didn't actually notice any difference. And he didn't.
You still grow beans.
Yeah. And he grew some really marvelous fall beans, and he had learned to put them in his freezer too, to keep them. He adopted, even though he couldn't read and write, he adopted a lot of modern technology. They have maintained their survival skills they grew up with and have no intention of becoming dependent on the on the benevolence of large corporations and giant factory farms. Some of them are retired factory workers and miners who are now dealing with crippling disabilities or respiratory problems, but they garden as if their lives depended on it. Most lack the feeling of having a certain degree of independence. Others are better educated but want to maintain their survival skills outside the system, either because they want to be prepared for the worst economically or because they have a simple love of growing things. I often hear them say, quote, "I just like to see things grow." Some are college graduates with several degrees, but they never got above the raisin and strive to keep in touch with the ways of their ancestors and maintain historic ties with the land. I never cease to be amazed at the sense of history of so many seed savers, regardless of the amount of formal education. Many talk about great uncles or great grandfathers who fought on one side or the other during the Civil War. Border state Kentuckians fought on both sides, often brother against brother or father against son. Or they speak of great aunts or great grandmothers who were renowned seed savers and had particular varieties named after them. And I might add here that most traditional bean varieties, heirloom bean varieties, are named after women, because the women were the ones who would notice the sports or the mutants growing up. They would collect the seeds from an individual plant that was different from the others, grow them the next year, and then if they were good, they would share the seeds and keep them going, and they would typically be named after them. Yes, Marty?
Just 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. I'll have to move on here. 16 and 17. Time passes quickly when you're having fun. How did we get that way? In August 1977, Berea College held an agriculture summit to discuss the future of its agriculture program. Some of you might remember that. Speakers from several fields and from various institutions were invited to attend, and individuals from many departments on campus were in attendance as well. We spent the better part of 2 days listening to talks and holding discussions about the possible alternative scenarios for Berea's agriculture program. I don't remember many of the speeches, but I do remember, did trade some heirloom seeds with Wendell Berry, already a well-known Kentucky author who was one of the speakers. What I do remember vividly was the banquet held on the last evening of the conference at Boone Tavern, the historic hotel and restaurant on the college campus. Probably close to 100 people sat down to a typical banquet meal, which of course included green beans. The beans are the only thing I remember, and they made an indelible impression on me. The beans were straight as an arrow, very round, about 5 inches long, deep green in color, and as I discovered, tougher than shoe leather. I couldn't puncture the beans with a fork or cut them with a knife, so using my finger, I picked up the whole one, put it in my mouth, and started chewing. An uncomfortable time later, I finally took it out of my mouth and as discreetly as possible placed the unchewable bean on the side of my plate. Sometime later, I conducted the scientific experiment. After the banquet was over, but before the plates had been removed, I walked around the banquet room checking all the tables and noticing how many people had eaten the beans. The beans appeared to be untouched on every plate, while other portions of food had been eaten. If the banquet had happened earlier at the conference, we certainly would have had another interesting topic to discuss. One that says volumes about modern agriculture, American agriculture and marketing, and the gullibility of the American people. 6 years later, I was giving a talk at a regional foods conference at the University of Mississippi. I noticed the difference between the old-timey beans and those produced through the miracles of modern plant breeding. I discussed how in our efforts to reduce farm labor and maintain a cheap food policy popularized by major agricultural organizations, including land-grant universities, we were making some of our most basic foods almost inedible and of dubious nutritional value. I then told my story about the banquet beans. Several chefs happened to be in attendance, and what they had to say was enlightening. To a person, they were all aware of the problems with commercial beans, but they served them anyway, just to adhere to tradition and to add color to the meal. Beans were used as a garnish. The chef said no one expected them to be eaten. That was a total surprise to me. 2 minutes left?
Yeah, about 2 minutes.
A much earlier incident in 1965 made a similar case against the modern tomato. I always planted at least 10 times the number of tomato plants needed to feed my family, and I had a bumper crop. I went to Lexington to meet with the produce manager of Kentucky Foods, hoping to sell him some of my extras. The manager was quite pleased with the several tomatoes I brought to show him. He sampled one of them, said it was excellent flavor, and offered to buy all the tomatoes I had to sell. So I went back to Berea, picked all my ripe and nearly ripe tomatoes, and took them to the assigned place the following day. I probably had close to 10 bushels, and I was so proud of the tomatoes that I took a photograph of them before I left. When I arrived back at Kentucky Foods and showed the produce manager what I had brought him, he became quite angry and belligerent and chastised me for my ignorance. I had brought him ripe tomatoes, and he didn't want ripe tomatoes. He wanted green tomatoes that he could leave in storage until one of his stores needed tomatoes. He would then gas them as he hauled them to the individual store so they would appear red by the time they got there. He was absolutely correct when he called me ignorant. I had no idea that this was a standard practice when it came to marketing tomatoes in grocery stores. I knew a grocery store. Store tomatoes didn't taste very good, but it never occurred to me that I was eating green tomatoes that had been gassed to color them. Of course, the modern situation has become much worse since then. Modern plant breeding has produced tougher and tougher tomatoes that can withstand long-distance transportation, be kept in storage much longer, and still have a 35-day shelf life when they finally reach our local mega markets. It's no wonder that children boycott them in every way possible they can devise. We have time for one question.
Yeah, oh, no.
I guess I answered all of them already.
Well, thank you.
Well, you all have been a very good group,
Thank you very much.
very attentive.
And you will be at the farmer's market this summer?
I'll be at the farmer's market this summer. I'll go home this afternoon and start planting tomatoes in my high tunnel. So I've got plants that are ready. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.